Okay, fun seekers. So you found a vehicle online on Facebook Marketplace. You're hoping to flip it. You're wanting something for yourself. You're wanting a work truck. You want something to do. You've been watching Will It Run videos on YouTube and you want to do one yourself. Well, I've been on a site here where I'm getting an old truck running, and this lady asked me that owns this property to kind of size up this truck, pull it out of a mud hole. Nobody seems to know a whole lot about it, except it's been sitting in that mud hole for between 7 and 9 years. And I'm gonna try to assess this thing and see if it's worth pursuing, making it run. It probably is. It's a pretty good Ford truck. But I'm gonna take you step by step through how my brain works when I do this stuff. Come on. There we go. Come on, baby. So the lady that owns this property where I'm getting the K10 in another video asked me to do an assessment of this old, I believe it's a 99 F250 utility bed truck. It's been sitting in this hole back here in her back field for about 9 years. I figured since I had the excursion and the chain down here anyway, I'd go ahead and yank it out of this hole with her assistant here and see if it'll run, and I'll show you guys how to assess an EFI. And a lot of people are afraid of electronic fuel injection. There's no need for that. Yeah, your classic Will It Run videos are always points and condensers and carburetors, and they're easy to deal with. These are just as easy. They just tend to be more expensive and more time consuming. But they're the same principle, and when you get them fixed, they usually run well. This truck is a 1999, I think, and it's getting to the age, you know, a lot of those 99s now, they're getting to be 24, 25 years old, so you're gonna start seeing them sitting around just like the old Camaros, Mustangs, Chevelles, F250 pickups, all that stuff in the past. I see more of them all the time, and don't be afraid of this. It's no big deal, really. So let me walk you around this thing. We'll go step by step on exactly how I do it. I'm not a professional mechanic. I'm not gonna give you the technical lingo. I'm just gonna tell you how it works for me. And I've been pretty successful with this through the years. It also helps to do a little research on what you're looking at before you get there, and try to remember what you read when you're doing this research. That's one thing that I've always been fairly good at. So let's walk around this thing and I'll show you what I do. The first thing I typically try to do is look for mismatched paint and rust anywhere that you can see it, and also try to get a mental picture of how this thing was stored. Now, I know it was stored under an oak tree. Oak trees are disgusting. They're moldy, messy trees, but they're great for shade. So you kind of have to default assume that you're going to have some mildew and mold, probably some oxidation on things, but the seats and the glass and the paint may be largely preserved well. Sometimes another thing to do, go ahead and take your gas cap off, stick your schnoz down in there and take a big whiff. I'm not going to do that right now, but if you smell really old, rancid gas or watery gas, then might as well budget for a fuel pump. This truck's got a Tommy lift gate on it with a whole bunch of mold. Watch out for bikers. Nice Redding utility bed. And this is the side that obviously didn't see much sun. That's why there's more mold over here, moss, mildew, all the above. I can tell this was a kind of a loaded model because we got chrome rims. It used to say XLT there. The hood's already popped. That's either a good thing or a bad thing. And also, don't forget to check underneath. Check the frame. In fact, I'll just do that now. This actually has more rust than I would expect it to have for being a Florida truck its whole life. Now that's all surface rust on the frame, but a lot of vehicles in Florida never get this unless they are stored in a wet area. So I know that that was a damp area back where it was stored. The gas tank's there. It's always kind of good to check for major components, kind of zoom in on the U-joint areas, whatever front end parts you can see. You know, these bushings are probably shot in these front radius arms or whatever they are. But it looks like you've got to make sure that things are commensurate with age and condition. So with the condition of the body, and this truck I believe has 280,000 miles on the odometer anyway, this is about what I'd expect to see, except perhaps a bit rustier because of where it was sitting. The body of the truck is actually really solid, and that's a great thing about Florida. I mean, this thing's really rock solid. Definitely been sitting for, when people tell you 7 years, you might as well add at least 10%, because nobody ever remembers. So I would favor this sitting probably closer to 9. Also, it doesn't hurt to check the tire condition, and as you can see here, the tire's kind of, it's a Maypop. That's what we call a Maypop. In fact, this thing had a whole set of Maypops, and that one did. This paint would probably come back really good though. There's no paint flaking off of this thing, so it's probably base clear. All right, interior time. Some loose window switches here. They've probably been replaced. Oh, popped right back in. Yeah, this is a loaded model for a work truck. Headliner's falling. That's standard car stupidity. It's obviously a commercial use truck. AC guy. There's a Honeywell Pro 3000 thermostat. Those were some of the best thermostats ever made, in my opinion. Then I look around. Sometimes you got panels missing underneath here. Right here we've got some wiring. This is probably a trailer brake controller or some kind of a master switch for the redding bed. Got some pedal wear going on. Hood latch is stuck out. This again is another indication it's been sitting for a long time. These Ford trucks are notorious for door jamb switches that need oiled all the time. So if the dome light turns off, 279,985 miles. So, and we got a big wear spot in the seat here too. So really, you're kind of looking around for signs of molestation, I guess you'd say. Gotten into the wiring harnesses or the switches or torn things apart, never put them back together. Has anybody ever duct taped or electrical taped the overdrive switch on the end of the shifter handle? And really, this truck looks pretty good. Got some cigarette burns in the seat. That is a ductwork list, materials list. I've done that many times. Another quick tip for accidents. A lot of times people never replace both headlights if the truck was wrecked in the front, maybe one corner. So you'll have one really nice headlight and one really cruddy headlight. This one, they're about the same level of cruddiness, and the paint is not mismatched anywhere, so I'm going to assume that this truck's never been wrecked. And these hood latches are always stuck. Stand by. Now, don't ever trust those lift supports on the side of the hood. I just so happen to know though that these are holding up good. One of the first things that I like to do is immediately check for rodent damage, because rats chewing a wiring harness on a 71 Chevelle is one thing, but rats chewing a wiring harness on one of these is a whole nother thing. And there's usually indications of that going on. You'll see a lot of debris typically right there in the intake manifold area, or somewhere in this intake tubing, possibly. If that's open, you're going to have problems. This one is sealed up. The wiring harnesses that I can see, now that harness draped right here is obviously that part under the dash. It's definitely some kind of aftermarket accessory, so I'm going to assume it's either for the liftgate or there's some kind of power inverter or something in the redding utility box. Take a quick look at all the other wiring here. Looking for open wiring harnesses. This might be trailer towing wiring here. Sometimes when you see these blue tags, that's pretty much what it is, something that was added. Oh, that might be a recall piece for a brake switch. I think I remember something about these being recalled for that. You don't really have to look at these fuse blocks, but sometimes I do anyway. Looks pretty good. Don't see a lot of corrosion. Don't even really notice immediately any burned up fuses. Looks like it's got brake fluid. Check the oil. On the oil, you're looking for milkiness. Or smell it and see if it smells like gas. Although that doesn't happen too often on fuel injected engines. Oil looks dirty but full. Now I know from experience these 5.4 V8s are probably 500,000 mile engines or more. This is a 2-valve version of a 5.4 liter V8. In 2004, they switched it to 3-valve. The 3 valves weren't so great, in my opinion. However, I have seen these being stored in junkyards with 40,000 miles on them that had plastic timing chain guides that broke. So you had to tear the whole front of the engine apart, put new timing chain guides in it with 40,000 miles. So a lot of the storage of these things plays a big role in what kind of life and what kind of service you're going to get out of it. Okay, I got my universal battery in here. Now, one thing I've always wanted to cover with people that I always forget to, a long time ago, when I worked at the auto parts store, there was an old, kind of a story where people said, well, if you think your alternator's bad, just take your negative cable off while the car is running, and if it keeps running, your alternator is good. Well, that was a long time ago, 40s, 50s, 60s, some 70s, maybe a little bit in the 80s, but it was kind of a myth with newer cars that had alternators because see all these cables here. These supply, probably one of these goes to the starter or the starter solenoid, and one probably goes to the fuse block, the main fuse block, and supplies power to that. And it gets its ground through the battery. So on some cars, if you do that and it stalls anyway, you'll go put an alternator on it and it won't fix it because all you're really doing is killing the power to the fuse block sometimes in certain cars. Now, it will work in some. I've heard of it working before. I've even witnessed it myself. But for the most part, you're kind of just risking blowing out your ECU or something like that. The best way to do a test on these newer cars like this is to do a dedicated alternator test, and there's many ways to do that. Or test the battery outside of the car. And they've got gizmos that do all that in the car now, like at the auto parts stores. But taking the negative cable off is not a reliable or accurate test, in my opinion. On a 1962 Chevy, yeah, probably no problem. All right, it's not unusual to get sparks when you connect the batteries on these newer cars because there's lots of modules and computers and stuff that have to wake up. But just like with the older stuff, you want to give it a few minutes. Make sure you don't see any smoke anywhere. Make sure you don't smell anything horrible anywhere. Do a quick visual check. And everything seems good. Well, I don't hear no key chime. Turn the key on. Got dash lights. Now, I know a lot of people are big on putting oil in the cylinders and all that. When they're sealed up on these newer cars, you really don't have to do that. You can pretty much just jam on the starter and see what happens because they're built to such tight tolerances. As long as the only time I've ever seen these engines lock up on newer stuff is when they've been flooded or left open, the intake. Uh-oh. Now that single click like that tells me the battery connection sucks. Okay, I took a little hammer and tapped the battery terminals on there better. So now we got dash lights again. Uh-oh. Still got a bad connection. Okay, I had done an entire segment on the battery in this truck and didn't do it right. So here we go again. Take two. The date code on this battery is August 2015. The group size is 65, which is also up here. Really popular group size for these Ford trucks. And it's pretty safe to say that this truck's been sitting for at least the 8 years that I discussed earlier because of the date of the battery. 7.5, 8 years, so it makes perfect sense. Now, most power problems are usually almost always the ground. If you don't have ground, you don't have nothing. You can have too little ground, dirty ground, bad ground, or no ground. Too much ground. It's possible. I've seen it. And of course, these are corroded over here. So I'm just going to start with this one. Take this off, clean it up. I got some marine style terminals, which I use on stuff like this because they're cheap and easy to deal with. My PB blaster is way over there in my truck. And I'm running out of steam for the day. I bought one of these formerly 99-cent battery brushes that are now $8. And they haven't changed a bit in 50 years probably. Take the adjustable hammer, just tap it down there flush. Okay, let's see what it gives now. Okay, we got spinach. On the way in here, I ran over my can of brake cleaner, which I normally use as starting fluid, because I irresponsibly left it in the driveway. I also ran over my starting fluid, but I think it still works. Yep. So what we're going to do is we're going to find a vacuum line or the intake tube and squirt some of that down in there. All right, I typically like to go as close to the intake as I can. Since I'm short and fat and can't reach up there, I may do this one, or if I could reach one of the two vacuum hoses on the back side over here, I would do that one. Yeah, you know what? We're just going to do it just like that. Hopefully I'm not wrecking that sensor right there. All right, if it backfires, it'll do it right at the camera, and I'll upload it to slow motion. Okay, it's gonna run, no problem. See if this can is busted, and it's just running out of there. I might be able to do like this and just let it dribble. This is not OSHA approved. I'm not gonna push it too much. I know it's gonna run. There's no crazy noises, grinding, sparking, smoking, hissing, any kind of thing like that going on. You could hear the oil pressure prime up as soon as it fired the first time. Sounds a little slow. That'll get better once the oil warms up and it gets circulating in the engine again. So let me give you the breakdown on what I think about this truck. So since it fired, we know that the ECU, you know, the computer stuff, sensors and all that stuff is probably functioning, at least to some extent. And we know that mechanically the engine seems to be fine. Now, can't rule out the fact that it might run hot when it warms up, or it might have low oil pressure, or whatever, but it gives you a good solid foundation on what to expect. Now, I know just from my experience through the years that this thing needs a fuel pump, and it probably sat for a long time before the 9-year period, or with the mileage. You know, everything's got to jive with the mileage and the condition. It was probably about due for a fuel pump at that mileage anyway, so it either sat, which took out the fuel pump, or the fuel pump is what led to it sitting. One of the two. Probably all the freons leaked out of the AC, probably got rusty brakes, probably going to be some other expenses involved. It certainly needs to be cleaned up. So my guess on this truck, the way it sits, if the Tommy gate works, which I didn't get a chance to check, I'd probably go like maybe 1,500 bucks on this thing. Maybe a little bit more, maybe up to $2,000 on its best day, the way it is, because you're gonna need $600-800 worth of tires, $200 to $400 fuel pump if you do it yourself. Who knows what else? I'm sure it needs a tune-up. Alternator is probably on its way out, but there is some indication that it was well maintained. Like, this is a relatively new hose, still soft and supple and has a sticker on it. The air filter looked good when I took the air box apart. All the fluids looked okay, except for the coolant's a skosh low. So there's probably a really good foundation here for a good driving truck, and that's the way that I do the OBD2 based EFI vehicles, to see if they're worth pursuing. Basically, sometimes they're not, and if you can't get it to fire on starting fluid and a fresh battery, I wouldn't even waste my time half the time. You may regret it. Okay, so there you have it. That truck's going to be just fine. The lady wants to put it back into service and use it for her crafts and stuff, so we'll see how that goes. Probably will clean up really good as well. So that's some questions that I get from time to time as a car hobbyist, not as a professional mechanic, as to how I do these things. I've saved a lot of EFI cars just checking things out that way, and I've also walked away from a whole bunch of them too, because they can get really expensive really quickly, and a lot of them are kind of hard to work on. And you get into things like, you know, like if it needs a timing belt or needs, you know, it's got those internal water pumps and all that crap, just walk away from the stupid thing and only waste your time, because there's plenty of them around that have been sitting, and maybe from an estate or something, and you can get much better deals on some of those types of cars. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and make sure you pound that notification bell. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you guys on the flip side.
See you next time.
All right.
Tune in again.
Thanks for watching.
Yep.